Do you read Sutter Cane?
What? In 1994, John Carpenter released the third chapter in his Apocalyptic Trilogy, In the Mouth of Madness. Following The Thing and The Prince of Darkness, the two preceding films in that trilogy, In the Mouth of Madness is a film that is 1. A love letter to H.P. Lovecraft and his legacy, 2. A commentary on how the fictional world is always threatening to invade and supplicate reality, how that line sometimes gets blurred, and this film was done before social media, before the internet, and before mainstream media was exposed for its explicit biases. And 3. It's a psychological horror film that is smart, well-written, and has a belief that the audience is intelligent enough to figure it out as the story goes along. I think one of the reasons why Carpenter is so beloved in the horror community is because he never works down. He never makes a film with the idea that the audience is not engaged or intelligent or sophisticated enough to figure out the clues on their own. He respects his audiences. In the Mouth of Madness is the ultimate example of this because even watching 30 years later, there is still online debates about what the film is actually trying to tell us, what it could mean, the ending, and how it should be interpreted. But the debate has only spawned more respect for the film over time, not derision, as some films with ambiguous endings tend to do. To the other 2 points I made, yes, this film is influenced heavily by the works of H.P. Lovecraft. I know, whenever anyone watches this film, they immediately think that Carpenter is parodying his friend Stephen King, which is not entirely wrong. Carpenter did use King as his template for the main antagonist, Sutter Cane, and if you were not alive at the time, the 80s and the early 90s was one of Stephen King's creative and commercial peaks. It seemed like he was publishing a book every 6 months, and those books were immediate bestsellers, #1 on every list or chart, and the studios were constantly pushing out adaptations of his works for either theaters or television, some way better than others. But despite the differences in quality between written works and adapted works, Stephen King ruled his own piece of the pop culture kingdom during that time. And yes, he had his fanatics along with a large general audience that wanted more and more from him every single year. So yes, the concept of a pop culture figure having so much sway over the masses, in the form of King as an author, was the template that Carpenter used for Sutter Cane. And we see this with so many similarities to King's work. In early King novels, Castle Rock is a small New England town that is the setting for all of his stories. Sutter Cane in the film has Hobbs End. Hob, by the way, is an old colloquialism for the devil. The machine behind King's work, the publishing, the movie rights, the legal wrangling over profits, and the seclusion that King tried to maintain during his peak times are all present as supporting motifs in the film. But the material, the actual horror elements of the movie, are unmistakably H.P. Lovecraft. Spiritual, cosmic, madness, non-human influence, fate, and inevitability. These are defining characteristics of Lovecraft's work, basically becoming its own subgenre of horror. In reality, King and Lovecraft couldn't be more different in terms of success. Stephen King is a multi-millionaire many times over. He is one of the defining authors of the 20th century, and he did it while still being alive. Lovecraft died in poverty, his work only finding the success it had enjoyed after he passed away. So with all of that in mind, let's get into the plot of In the Mouth of Madness and see if we can survive to see reality at the end of the day. But before we do, we invite you to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps out the channel each week, and we appreciate it very much. We first have to point out that the opening credits is not a throwaway scene. John Carpenter is already setting up what we already labeled as the machine that is behind the work of Sutter Cane. Massive printing presses churning out paperback copies of his latest novel with the promise of the next to come, the same title as this movie, In the Mouth of Madness. Already we have a meta-commentary, watching a film adaptation of a book that isn't even published. We next get a very serene-looking shot of an ambulance driving up to a hospital on top of a hill. Inside, the doctors are waiting for their patient to arrive. The orderlies force this patient along. He's wearing a straitjacket. He fights, he kicks, he gets in a couple of shots, including one of the balls. And this is how we are introduced to our main protagonist, John Trent, played by the great Sam Neill. He's dragged off to his padded cell and just left there. He is constantly screaming that he's sorry and that he's not crazy, even though as an audience member, you have to admit, he's acting very insane and violently. His behavior causes the rest of the inmates to act out, and the head doctor decides to calm them down by playing We've Only Just Begun by the Carpenters. And funny enough, everyone but Trent begins to sing along. And as Trent laments his situation, the music fades, and a gaunt hand knocks at his door. Trent looks to see who it is, but cannot see anything through the little window. A shadow then passes behind him. Trent turns to see Sutter Cane. He tells Cane that this is a lousy way to end it, to which Cane replies, "This isn't the end. You haven't read it yet." The gaunt hand reappears, shatters the glass window, and we get flashbacks of the rest of the movie as Trent collapses. Soon another doctor, Dr. Wren, arrives and visits with Trent. It is obvious Wren is there because Trent is one of the many people who have suddenly gone insane, and there is now an epidemic of lunacy in the outside world. During this time, Trent has only asked for a black crayon, which he has used to draw crosses anywhere and everywhere he could. Trent then tells Wren his story, how he got there, and why he wants to stay. We learn that John Trent is an insurance investigator and a very good one. He quickly dispatches a false insurance claim, and afterwards, during lunch with his client, he's asked to look into another claim, one more high profile, that of the disappearance of Sutter Kane. Now, Trent is not a fan. He knows very little of Kane's work. And as they discuss the case, a disheveled man with an axe walks out of a bookstore from across the street. This man makes his way to the diner Trent is sitting in. He raises his axe and smashes the window, sending everyone in a panic, and then asks Trent,
"Do you read Sutter Kane?"
Now take note of the blue eyes, because that's a useful detail for later on in the film. Now before this lunatic can kill Trent, he's gunned down by the police. We next see Trent back at home, watching the news, which is reporting on riots occurring at bookstores all across the country because Sutter Kane's new novel cannot meet demand. The reporter asks, when does fiction become religion? The next day, Trent meets with Hargrove, the publisher of Kane's novels. He also meets Linda Stiles, Sutter Kane's editor, and she's very snobbish at first, even making a dig at Stephen King. Trent learns that Kane is missing and that the last person to see him was Kane's agent, who had read several chapters of Kane's new book. That agent just happens to be the man who attacked Trent with an axe the day before. Stiles explains to Trent that they know nothing about where Kane lives or his current whereabouts, and that Kane believes that his writing is becoming real, that it's no longer fiction, and that is having an effect on his less stable readers. Reluctantly, Trent agrees to take the case, thinking this is all a scam or a setup. His first stop is to the bookstore where Kane's agent first went crazy and purchases Kane's back catalog. The employee at the bookstore approaches Trent and tells him, he sees you. Trent then returns home. He begins reading the novels and learns that they're better than he expected, even giving him a scare or two. He's also having dreams of disfigured individuals committing violence, including that of Kane's agent, who's hacked to death by a group of people wielding axes. And as the night goes on, the investigative mind of Trent takes over, and he realizes that the covers of Kane's books, when properly dissected, form a puzzle, that of the state of New Hampshire. And for Trent, he now believes he has it all figured out. He knows where to find Sutter Kane. And as I said, this film is a love letter to H.P. Lovecraft. So the 6 Sutter Kane novels, which Trent uses to track the town of Hobbs End, are the following: The Hobbs End Horror, The Feeding, The Whisper in the Dark, Something in the Cellar, The Breathing Tunnel, and Haunter Out of Time. These are all direct references to H.P. Lovecraft's works. The Dunwich Horror, The Whisperer in Darkness, The Rats in the Walls, The Thing in the Doorstep, The Shadow Out of Time, and The Haunter of the Dark. Also, the title of the movie, In the Mouth of Madness, refers to At the Mountains of Madness, yet another work from Lovecraft. After revealing everything that he's discovered, Trent and Stiles make the journey to Hobbs End, an unmarked town in the middle of New England. At this point, Trent and Stiles have one of the most important conversations in the entire film. Stiles explains to Trent that if the majority of the world went insane, then Trent, as a sane person, would be the one locked in a padded cell. This conflict between fiction and reality, between sane and insane, becomes a recurring theme throughout the entire movie. And as the two drive, the journey becomes stranger and stranger. First, they're initially lost, but as Trent sleeps and Stiles drives, we meet our first inhabitant of Hobbs End, a man on a bicycle. At first, he looks normal, but after passing him, he comes back around and he's horribly aged. And a third time around, Stiles hits him with the car. They stop to check on him, but he merely gets up and rides off after telling Stiles that he can't get out. He won't let me out. Not knowing what to do at that point, they continue their drive. The road disappears. Stiles sees clouds beneath the tires, and then suddenly, through a covered bridge, they emerge into Hobbs End. The town is deserted, or at least it appears that way. And after looking around a little bit, they make their way to the Pickman Hotel, which Trent and Stiles recognizes as a location in Kane's novel, Hobbs End Horror. Stiles begins to believe that they are inside a Sutter Kane novel. Trent begins to believe that this is all just a publicity stunt, a joke, and of course, we must remember that Stiles is someone who has read, very carefully, all of Sutter Kane's works. So as an audience member, you start to believe that maybe she's under the influence of Kane already. Now, in addition to the hotel, they realize that the entire town is a replica of Hobbs End from the novels, including the giant black Orthodox church, which in reality is a real church that the production crew found in the middle of nowhere, which in and of itself is a little creepy. With little to go on, Trent and Styles go to this church, and they notice a caravan of vehicles approaching at high speed. Styles remembers from her readings that they cannot be in front of the church because the men in the vehicles are armed and they're very agitated. The leader of the men is Simon, and yes, if you recognize him, that's Vigo the Carpathian from Ghostbusters 2. He's there to rescue his child, who Kane is now controlling. The doors of the church swing open to reveal little Johnny, but then they close, and then they swing open again to reveal Sutter Kane. At that point, a pack of Dobermans round the corner and head towards the group of armed men. Now, in reality, the Dobermans were a little over-aggressive, and several stuntmen went to the hospital with severe bite wounds. But, as I say...
Still, I have to say, you play with matches, you get burned.
After witnessing all of this, Trent and Styles return to the hotel and Styles comes clean that this was supposed to be a publicity stunt. But the problem is Kane really disappeared, and that they were never supposed to find a town called Hobbs End because one doesn't exist. That everything they are seeing is real, that they are living inside the book, except that the book they are living in is the new book, In the Mouth of Madness, and only Styles and Kane's agent actually have read parts of that book. Styles has no idea what the ending is supposed to be. At this point, Trent has had enough. He believes this is all a con and he decides to leave. But Styles takes the keys and abandons him at the hotel. And with nothing more to do, Trent goes for a beer and meets up with Simon, who warns him to leave while he still can. Styles, in the meantime, is headed back to the Black Church to find Sutter Kane, but runs into the infected children, infected with whatever Kane has released in the heart of the church. Still undeterred, she enters that church, and we see that it is unholy, displaying upside-down crosses. And as she moves to the back, she enters a room where there's a typewriter on a desk. But soon Kane appears, and he begins to type. He tells Linda that for years he thought he was making up all the stories on his own, but now he realizes it was them, giving him the power to make it all real. And by them, we can only suspect at this point that Kane is under some sort of demonic control or has made some sort of pact with a demonic entity. As Linda tries to talk to Kane, he forces her to read his new book, and her eyes begin to bleed. From this point, it is clear that Kane is transforming humans into demonic creatures and releasing the abyss upon the world. In our next scene, Styles has returned to Trent at the hotel. She's no longer herself, though. She has been taken. Trent sees Mrs. Pickman transform into a demon creature and is attacked by Styles as he tries to get her to leave. With no other option, he flees, but is stopped by the townspeople. To escape them, he runs back into the bar and he runs into Simon again. Simon has been attacked, apparently by his own 5-year-old girl. He is desperate. He places a shotgun to his head and he says that he has to, that Kane wrote him that way. He then pulls the trigger. It is here that reality has shattered Trent's confidence that this is all a setup, and things begin to fall apart from there. Trent again finds Styles. To keep him from leaving, she swallows his car keys, but he forces the ignition with a screwdriver. Still under the control of Kane, Styles tries to entice Trent by kissing him, but he rejects her, and after stopping the car and getting out, Styles spider walks towards Trent, and at this point, he's really had enough. He leaves her and tries to find a way out of Hobbs End, but he cannot. Every turn he makes brings him back to the center of town. In a fit of frustration, he decides to just drive through the crowd of townspeople, but turns at the very last minute to avoid Styles, who's standing with them. He crashes and wakes up in the confessional booth at the Black Church. The voice on the other side is Sutter Kane confessing to him his motivations and the consequences of his own popularity. Kane wanted Trent alive because Kane has a job for him, to bring back his finished manuscript. Why? Because nothing existed before Kane wrote it, including John Trent himself. The lines now between reality and fiction are officially blurred. Kane tears himself apart like paper, revealing an abyss, and as Trent moves towards that abyss, Styles reads from the book, and everything she reads is exactly as Kane wrote it. Then the demons come. Trent runs for his life and finds himself transported back to a country road. And as in biblical terms, like Gabriel for God, Trent is now Kane's messenger. He meets a paperboy and asks him for directions. And yes, that is Hayden Christensen in what may be his first ever film role. Trent hitchhikes for a ride and gets picked up by a tractor trailer, and he leaves the manuscript behind and he makes his way to a hotel. But he cannot escape fate. The manuscript is delivered to him at the front desk. He takes it and burns it. But again, he cannot escape fate. And as he rides a bus back to New York, Kane appears to him in a dream and tells him that his favorite color is blue and that he is now God. Blue becomes sort of a mark of the beast for Kane. And if you look at the people he's possessed throughout the film, they have blue eyes. Trent's last option is to return to Hargrove and tell his entire story. The problem is, Hargrove doesn't recall anyone named Styles, and half of what Trent is telling him seems like a fiction story itself. Not knowing whether he's sane or insane at this point, Trent takes relief in telling Hargrove that it's going to be okay because he destroyed the last manuscript. But Hargrove tells him that's impossible because 6 months ago, Trent already delivered Kane's last work, and it's already been published. Trent begs Hargrove not to distribute it, to which Hargrove tells him, too late, and the movie comes out next month. We then cut to a line at a bookstore. Kane's latest and presumably posthumous work is causing panic, and we see a cardboard cutout of the main character of this novel, and it is of course Trent himself, who appears disheveled, much like Kane's agent did in the beginning of the film, and murders a young reader with an axe. This is where our flashback ends, and we're back in the padded cell. Dr. Wren finishes up with Trent and leaves. Later that night, the hospital is attacked. Trent is awoken with the screams of the dying. His gift from Kane is his release, and he wanders the now apocalyptic landscape, making his way to a theater to enjoy a movie. His movie. And all he can do is laugh and cry and eat popcorn as the world around him crumbles. Thus ends In the Mouth of Madness, a film that leaves you wondering if you're watching reality, fiction, or the inevitable result of a society that moves further away from the truth in favor of the comfort of unfulfilling deception. As an audience member, you get to decide. And as Halloween approaches and here down south of the border, the Day of the Dead, we are featuring more horror offerings for your viewing enjoyment. So next week, we have another favorite starring Sam Neill for Retro Mover Review Theater, 1997's Event Horizon. I hope you join us for that one. However, if you need more horror right now, click on the thumbnails for our look back at the original Friday the 13th and Stephen King's only directorial credit, 1986's Maximum Overdrive, starring Emilio Estevez. I thank you for watching, and from south of the border, salute and a huevo.